Let's talk about Nigeria and its oil. Nigeria is Africa's top oil producer, and oil is the government's biggest source of revenue. But the economy has been struggling, and poverty levels are on the rise.
Poverty of those living around the source of Nigeria's wealth is bare to see.
So why can't Nigerians depend on their country's oil wealth? What happens to all that money? They call Nigeria the African giant for a reason. It's home to Africa's biggest population and largest economy, powered by a growing services industry and agricultural exports like cocoa and palm oil. It has Nollywood, Africa's biggest film industry, fashion houses, a booming music business, and a very wealthy elite, including the richest man in Africa, Aliko Dangote. Nigeria also has a lot of natural resources: minerals, gold, and oil. Lots of oil. It's got the second largest proven reserves on the African continent and is the 12th largest producer worldwide. And yet, many Nigerians have it hard. World Poverty Clock says 90 million people live not just in poverty, but extreme poverty. That's 48% of the population. Compare that to 24% in Ethiopia and 16% in Kenya, and they don't even have oil.
Despite Nigeria's vast oil wealth, half its population lives on less than $2 a day.
Now you'd think a resource-rich country like Nigeria could rely on some of that oil wealth. The thing is, the Nigerian government does, but that's part of the problem. Nigeria's government depends on oil for as much as 75% of its revenue. So when global oil prices bottomed out in 2014, Nigeria went into recession, and it's still struggling to get out. But even when oil prices are good, Nigerian experts say not a huge slice of that revenue gets to the people.
The focus should be of the monies that the Nigerian government gets, how much is reinvested into the lives of the people.
They're still using some of that oil revenue to pay off debts and the rest to pay salaries to the lawmakers. So things like schools, hospital, infrastructure, much needed infrastructure does not get built.
Okay, so where does that revenue go? Let's follow the money and the oil. Nigerian crude is found right here under the waterways of the Niger Delta. A few Nigerian companies operate there, but the ones doing most of the exploring and extracting are international companies. Shell is one of the big ones. It provides 40% of Nigeria's oil production. But because Nigeria doesn't have the infrastructure to refine its own crude oil, these foreign companies sell it abroad. And in the end, Nigeria has to import billions of dollars worth of refined oil back in.
Multinational actually extracts the oil. So if they think that refining the oil in Switzerland or refining it in the United States will help them lower costs, definitely that's where they will do it, because the capacity to refine it isn't there in Nigeria.
Now, what Nigeria does have is a central body called the Nigerian National Petroleum Corporation. The NNPC is both an oil industry regulator and a massive commercial corporation. The corporation arm signs contracts with all those international companies, and the companies pay for all the initial costs, plus things like oil licenses, royalties, and a tax on their profits to the NNPC. So the NNPC takes all that money and pays it into Nigeria's national treasury. But the regulator that's supposed to police that flow of money is part of the NNPC.
It means that there's a huge lack of transparency, that a lot of transactions are happening under a cloak of obscurity. You cannot be both a regulator and a player. You can't be a referee and a player as well. It just doesn't make any sense.
That lack of transparency has led to corruption in the oil sector. Billions of dollars in oil money have gone missing over the years. One of the most infamous cases was back in 2016.
It was reported that $16 billion in oil revenue had just gone missing. And this money was supposed to be given from NNPC and sent to the National Treasury. But the money was not sent over. So every few years in Nigerian headlines, you see things like 16 billion missing, 30 billion missing.
There's another type of missing oil money, and that's taxes. As we mentioned earlier, international oil companies are supposed to pay taxes on their oil profits to the NNPC. But companies are accused of reporting lower profits in order to pay fewer taxes. So a company can sell Nigerian oil at a lower price to its own subsidiary in a tax haven and then sell that oil to other buyers at full price. They can inflate the costs of their Nigerian operations or underreport the volume of oil they produce to begin with. So public oil money gets lost in a swamp of tax havens and murky accounting. And then there's theft. Yes, straight up stealing.
Tucked in the forest, we find these men cooking oil.
There are hundreds of illegal refineries in the Niger Delta, where criminal gangs like the Delta Avengers tap into pipelines. In early 2019, 22 million barrels of oil were stolen and sold on the black market.
The barges then take it to larger tankers in the Atlantic Ocean, and from there to buyers in West Africa, Europe, Latin America, and as far as Asia.
There's even a language in Nigeria that conveys and captures the sentiment that the oil is here to steal. For example, you'll hear a phrase in Nigeria called the national cake, and that just means the oil money.
Oil companies like Shell blame these attacks for massive oil spills and fires. But human rights group Amnesty International says oil companies are also responsible for the spills and accuse them of misleading and neglecting local communities. So, sabotage, theft, tax evasion, corruption, lots to tackle. But Nigeria's government has been releasing annual audit reports on its energy industry, demanding unpaid taxes and compensation from international oil companies, and after 17 years of delays, is ready to implement the Petroleum Industries Bill. The bill has its critics, but many in Nigeria hope it'll clean up the oil sector by doing things like splitting the NNPC's commercial business from its regulator. Nigeria also says it wants to diversify its economy away from oil, and there are signs it wants to develop its own industry to cut back on all the foreign involvement. Remember Aliko Dangote, Africa's richest man? He's building a new refinery near Lagos.
We have to make sure that oil is actually refined within Nigeria, and that will help reduce importing the refined petroleum products into the country.
Now, none of that will single-handedly fix Nigeria's oil industry, its economy, or poverty levels. But the hope is it'll go some way to getting Nigerians a bigger slice of that national cake. Thanks for watching, commenting, sharing, and giving us your feedback. It's been really helpful for us to see what's been working and which stories you'd like us to tackle next. If you haven't yet, subscribe and like all those Al Jazeera pages so you're always in the loop. See you next week.